Hello everyone, it's Jamal Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. Guys, forgive me, I'm hoarse. It feels like I'm coming down with something. Nevertheless, I want to do the news, especially with what's taking place abroad. So let me check my volume first. I hope everyone is doing okay this evening, or afternoon, I should say. Yeah, levels are good. Perfect. By the way, Cynthia McKinney is coming on this evening. She's coming on at 9:30. So I don't necessarily know how many videos I'm going to have between now and then, seeing it's going to be on late tonight. Also, Elizabeth Voss is going to be on Wednesday at 6 p.m. to talk about the Julian Assange issue. Essentially, Ecuador potentially giving him over, seeing as the people who are in power now are more in line with the United States. And him being essentially in a prison cell in the embassy. I mean, they cut his communications. So both of those should be extraordinarily interesting. McKinney interests me a little bit more only because of a very specific point. She's been in the political landscape, meaning she's been in office. So I'm curious from the standpoint of what we think it is versus what it actually is once you're behind the scenes, if that makes sense. I wake up this morning and I wasn't necessarily paying attention to the dates, meaning I didn't necessarily know that today was the day that the embassy was being officially consecrated or whatever. I want to look at American history for the moment, though. But before looking at that, if you came from another country and you looked at just history in the United States and you looked at the civil rights movement, and if the lens you looked at the civil rights movement was through Martin Luther King or Malcolm X, you would look at this and say this was a religious struggle. This struggle was among these moral people who were fighting this religious incident and everything else. Fact is, if you were in the country, though, you would say that's nonsense. This was a political issue. The thing is, the language that Martin Luther King uses when he's talking about it is through the guise of religion, this kind of moral argument, this moral force. But the moral force was usually somewhat of a political strategy. It wasn't purely just a religious thing. They might have used religion because they thought there's no hope in the situation would always be this way, and it needed something to exceed their present reality in order to get them over the hump. That may be true, but ultimately what they were talking about getting over the hump was a political hump. This was a political struggle. Same thing with Malcolm X. You looked at it through his lens. You might say, Muslims and pushing for civil rights. Nonsense. This was an issue. This was a political struggle. I can make the case that pretty much everything is a political struggle. But that's my lens. I guess I'm making the point that some of this sometimes depends on the lens that you're using to look at it, but there's some lenses that are more correct than others. This was a civil rights issue, in which case one side, the dominant side, ensconced in the law, ways to continue with themselves being dominant and relegating this other side into this kind of, I don't want to call it servile, but this subordinate state within the society itself. Politics. The issue with Israel and Palestine are similar. People often like to cascade this as this is a religious issue. They can never get along. I don't understand why these Jews and these Arabs have such struggle and have such conflict, etc., etc., etc. Nonsense. This is also politics. This goes back, goes back to the Brits who were promising things to Arabs and promising things to Jews in World War I. And here we are today. Just for the news, though, just so we know what's taking place right now. This is France 24. I pay attention to international politics, so yes, I see this stuff on all these different international channels, as long as it's in English. At least 43 dead in Gaza clash on the day U.S. Embassy officially opens in Jerusalem. That number has gone up. Dozens of Palestinians have been killed. That number has gone up. Number of Palestinians definitely 43. Nope. Gaza health official now says Palestinians killed by Israeli fire has risen to 52 with more than 1,200 wounded. And that number has been steadily increasing, and that number will continue to increase. Trump moves the embassy. People freak out. The reason why people are freaking out is because Jerusalem is in contested territory. Jerusalem was never supposed to be in Israeli hands, and yet it's in Israeli hands. And they got this during a war. Now the question becomes, what happened to come up with that war? Was it a just war? Was it not a just war? I guess that doesn't really matter. It was a war nonetheless. But how did you get to the point where there was this much conflict in this region of the world that is still extended to this day? And the point I'm making, that's not a religious conflict, that's a political conflict. Coding it in religious terms make it look like it's intractable. It's these esoteric things fighting one another. It's my God can beat the shit out of your God. That type of stuff. No, this is an issue of land. One side is militarily occupying another land and has turned that area into an open air ghetto. That's what's taking place. They're continuing to steal land beyond the war. Meaning, even after the war, they've continued to steal and appropriate land from people who are living on that territory against international law. We've allowed it, the world has allowed it to take place, and the stuff bubbles up when stuff like this happens. But I'm rambling. The reason why the U.S., this is such a big issue is because Jerusalem was, in effect, taken. The right of return and everything else was completely ignored. Ultimately, Israel said, this is our land. We're going to take whatever we want, and we're going to pass into our own law saying that we can take whatever we want. The interesting part to this, and I think somebody else made this allusion, I think it might have been Chomsky, this interesting correlation between Israel and the United States. How the United States took their land, essentially stole their land from the Native American population, depriving these people of their livelihoods, depriving these people of their homes and their way of life. Genocide. And the similarities in the way that Israel is just continuing to steal land, continuing to steal land, continuing to steal land. The world watches. They continue to steal land. There's another point to this that I wanted to make, and it doesn't elude me right now. It's lost to me. Let's go back in time, though. Oh, I know what I was going to say. I used the term murder, and people sometimes take issue with the way I phrase this. I call it murder because you fundamentally know that if you're shooting into a crowd of people with live ammunition, you're going to kill those people. Imagine for the moment the ridiculousness of a cop murdering a black kid in Detroit. The cops, or there's a protest. The cops pull up in these Humvees, they pull up in these tanks, and they open live fire into a crowd of protesters, injuring, let's say, 1,000 and murdering a bunch more. Now, we would look at this and we would be aghast if this took place on murder. What the fuck? They're live fire into a crowd of protesters. Is there a better way of handling this situation? This is fucking insane. How is this happening in America? You have people flipping out. The right-wingers would be okay with it. You're murdering darkies. Those darkies shouldn't have, messed with those good Christian cops. But nevertheless, most of the country would be aghast if they saw something like that take place. Even in the midst of the civil rights era, when Martin Luther King crossed that bridge, you had a country that didn't think there was any issue with civil rights at all, aghast by the fact that these cops were beating the shit out of African Americans in this way. I don't think things have gotten worse. I think people will be aghast by it. But for this, ultimately, you have something of a similar situation. Israel knew there were going to be protests. Israel knew there were people that were pissed off at what was taking place. Israel knew that there were people that were pissed off at the murdering that they were doing at the border, at the right of return march. They knew all this stuff. Are they incompetent? They knew it. Meaning, if you're going to come into a protest knowing that a protest is going to take place, and your only recourse in that protest that you can come up with in your mind is to say, we need to shoot live ammunition into a crowd of protesters. What do you think is going to take place? You're going to murder a bunch of protesters. You're going to injure a bunch of others. People need to start calling this what it is. This is intentional. This is not. This is the only thing we could do. The only thing we had at our disposal is just live ammunition. This was our only recourse. Nonsense. They're treating this as a military matter, not necessarily as a dispute. And in treating it as a military matter, they think it's perfectly okay to just murder en masse. The world doesn't do anything about it. The world didn't do anything about it during the right of return march. Why would they do anything about it now? So yeah, I'm using the term murder because I think it fits. And mind you, the protesters at the other were mostly peaceful. The overwhelming majority of those protesters were peaceful. And the Israeli military lied, saying it was being pushed by Hamas in order to to give this kind of fig leaf of cover to murdering protesters. Murdering peaceful protesters. The Nakba, the Palestinian catastrophe of 1948. Let's do history. I'm not going to keep this video long, but let's do history, because I want to get to why these people are pissed off and to kind of back up this point that this is a political struggle, not one of religion. I'm going to jump to the Brits. Because a lot of this can be laid at the doorstep of Britain. Yeah, thanks Britain. Hashtag thanks Britain. World War I, Britain is promising everything to everybody. They're promising land to the Arabs, and they're promising land to the Jews. The reason why they were doing this is because they were at their wits' end trying to win that war. And in trying to win that war, they were less picky about how they were kind of making their agreements around, of saying, this is what we'll do after the war. We'll figure that shit out after the war, but right now we need to do whatever we need to do to win. So they promised Arab territory, almost like an Arab state, and they promised land to Jews. They win the war. Once they win the war, the lands of the Ottoman Empire are now given to Britain. Now, at this point, Britain is extremely brittle from the standpoint of being an empire, because they're overstretched, and even though they've won more land, their military and everything else they're depleted as a state, or as a quote-unquote empire. So Jews start migrating to Palestine. And just to be more precise about it, let's show this plan. Right here. The door would open for Zionism. I hope you guys can see this. Let me enlarge this. There we are. The door would open for Zionism after World War II. After World War I, the First World War. During the war, Britain conquered Palestine from the Ottomans in 1917. At around the same time, the British Foreign Secretary, Arthur Balfour, issued the declaration to the Zionist movement promising British support for the creation of a Jewish state in Palestine. After the war, Palestine became a League of Nations mandate under British control in 1920. Since it was under British control, the Zionist movement heavily advocated the immigration of European Jews to Palestine. The result was an exponential rise in the number of Jews living in Palestine. According to British census data, in 1922, there were 83,790 Jews in Palestine. By 1931, it was 175,138. And by 1945, the number had jumped to 553,600 people. In 25 years, Jews has gone from 11% of the population to a total of 31%. Imagine that. Imagine if the population of African Americans, or let's say the population of Hispanics, went from 13% to 31% in a few years. That would, wow, that's a fuckfest. Naturally, the reaction from the Palestinian Arabs was less than enthusiastic. Tension between new Jewish settlers and native Palestinians erupted on numerous occasions. Eventually, the British decided by the 1940s that they could no longer control the territory and decided to end the mandate of Palestine and leave the country. I don't think the Hispanic thing fits, because this is somewhat different. But I'm just trying to make this point that imagine the situation of a population that's dramatically increasing by, what, threefold within the course of a few years. When Britain, this blows my mind, Britain gets to the point of saying, look, we can't control this anymore, so we're wiping our hands of it. You guys figure this shit out. And they left. That's amazing. And this issue has festered since. Look at the map. So, seeing the coming end of the British control over Palestine and inevitable conflict between Arabs and Jews that would follow, the newly created United Nations took up the issue in 1947. It came up with a plan known as the United Nations Partition Plan for Palestine. In it, they advocated the creation of two states in which has historically been known as Palestine, one for Jews, known as Israel, and for Arabs, known as Palestine. Right here. If you notice, Jerusalem is in an Arab state camp, firmly within an Arab state camp. There's no doubt, there's no debate. Is what it is. This is what the United Nations came up with. After the war, not so much. And moreover, the wild part about this is, and the more important part right here, while the Jews in Palestine accepted the plan with enthusiasm, yeah, I bet they would. You've just taken somebody else's property. The Arabs vehemently rejected it. In their view, it took away land that had been historically Muslim Arab land since the Crusades and gave it to the new Jewish minority in the country. Tensions continued to rise between the two sides. In the midst of the rising tensions, Britain declared an end to the Mandate of Palestine and withdrew from the country on May 14th, 1948. Today, that day, the Zionist movement in Palestine declared the establishment of a new country, Israel. The following day, the neighboring Arab countries declared their rejection of the declaration and invaded Israel. The result of the 1948 war was an enormous increase in the size of Israel. The resulting state was much larger than the state proposed by the United Nations, capturing approximately 50% of the Arab state, including, at this point, Jerusalem. Look, the United Nations plan stole land. Call it what it is. You had a bunch of people migrating to land that didn't belong to them. At 30%, you're still a minority. And in that 30% minority, they just gave them the land. Here, take the land. It's yours. The Arab neighbors flipped out over this and essentially tried to expunge the Jews from the land, seeing as their land was stolen. This became an international fuckfest. I mean, ultimately, Brits involved themselves into something and stole land. And you can say they went into a war, fair enough. But at the point where the Jews start going there, and at the point where you end up with a military occupation in order to keep that land in the way it is, and at the point where that country turns and creates an open-air ghetto in order to have these refugees. The reason why they call it the Nakba, the catastrophe, is because in that war, they lost massive amounts of land. In some cases, you had Arab neighbors saying, leave your land in these areas, with this idea that they can go back at the end of the war, assuming that the Arab neighbors win that war. In other cases, you had Jews committing atrocities, which scared the shit out of other Palestinians to leave their land. In other cases, you had forced expulsions. You had Jews busing people to the front lines of the Arab lines. You had Jews at the other point forcing those people to walk, carrying whatever they could, essentially creating mass refugees. That issue has persisted ever since. My point in getting this across is, this is not a religious issue. This is a political issue. Whatever the lens and whatever the way people like to describe this, they try to make it seem as it's intractable. It's not intractable. You have people who are in a particular land. Now, what I would say about this, and I'll end it on this because I don't want this to get too long. There's been a lot of chaos for God knows how long. And it's like the question and the difficulty becomes, how do you unwind that chaos? That's the part that becomes somewhat of a problem. It's not a religious issue, though. Making it a religious issue makes it as if it's impossible. So, let's see. We have people here. It's murder. Yeah, I think it's murder. Skip Rock. This proves that Jews control the media and intelligence agencies and MSC. Everyone needs to be open and honest about it now. Skip, I guess my only thing with this is, what about Saudi Arabia? Like when the United States talks about Saudi Arabia, a perfect example. When the U.S. talks about Saudi Arabia, they don't bring up the fact that they're murdering Yemenis. Not normally, not like talking about. When the Saudi prince comes jumping around the country, and when he's jumping around the country, you're going from point A to point B. Nobody says, hey, dude, you're weaponizing murder. You're weaponizing illness and disease and sever. Never brings it up. Is it possible that this has more to do with the United States being allies with Israel than anything else? Like, what I'm saying is, the United States media tends to follow in line with the political establishment. So you would never have the U.S. media talk bad about an ally of the United States, whether that's Saudi Arabia, whether that's Israel. It follows suit. I'm just saying. It's very few and far between where you would find us saying a bad word about Saudi Arabia, as despotic as that country is. And yet, you can hear the media talk about Iran all day. I'm more inclined to believe this is more to do with the allies of the country and less to do with just Israeli control. That's my thought. I could be wrong. Soviet Winter Spoon. Jews don't control the media. Capitalists control the media. Well, that Soviet winter prison. I'm sorry. Zionism is not Judaism. Yes, those are two very different things. Israel is basically United States UK puppet. Yes. Yes. Ish. Terrence Chesney. British is not all tea, crickets, and crumpets for sure. No, they're not. No, they're not. Gardner. Israel was almost founded in Uganda. No doubt Zionists would have claimed ancestral divine rights to the land as well. We would have started. Yes. The reason why I love you saying that, Gardner, is because power structures come up with reasons to justify their behavior. So in the South, in the United States, Christianity was used as a mold to justify the reason why blacks were inferior and were slaves. It's like, it's this coincidence of sorts that, hey, you're able to keep this power structure to the way it is, and you're trying to find reasons to come up with to justify it. Zionism would have been founded in Uganda for sure. They would have said, well, Jesus was from Uganda and he walked to, whatever. And so this is our natural homeland, whatever. This stuff is nonsense. That land had been there since the Crusades. And fact is, I don't really care who was there prior. Who was there now? And what are you doing to militarily occupy that land? You're doing nasty, disgusting, and atrocious things in order to occupy that land. Yeah, come on. Let's see. Anna Stansell. Have you all seen Abby Martin interviewing Jews in Israel on the streets? It is devastating. I did see that, Anna. Just like anywhere, I think it's propaganda doing talking. I've had the luxury of talking to several Jews on this. Oddly enough, some of the conversations weren't necessarily pushed; they just kind of happened. I've even had the conversation of talking to Palestinians about this. Again, conversations weren't necessarily pushed; they just kind of happened. I understand. I don't know if things have changed that drastically since I was there. I think I was there in like 2008, 2009. Abby Martin's experience was not my experience. Let me just say it that way, if I'm being honest. To be fair, things could have changed. And to be fair, the conversations may differ depending on who you're talking to and where you're talking to them. In my experience, there was defense of Israel, strong. By the same token, an acknowledgement of we do fucked up stuff sometimes. Now, that Israeli may have had a different experience because that Israeli lived in Muslim territories or Arab territories. So I don't know if it was because he lived in those territories that he had a different perspective of the way things were. But in his mind, he was like, look, he took it as people picked on Israel. That was a clear thing. People were picking on Israel. That's the first point. But the second point, once you're talking to him, like you're not like you're a horrible fucking person. You're just, when you're not doing that, you're having an honest conversation. You get to this thing where he's like, look, I get it, man. I can see how some people take issue with some of the stuff Israel did. By the same token, he's explaining the stuff that Israel did, giving this kind of reasons for doing it. By the same token, do I doubt that there are some people that have those particular point of views that Abby Martin is getting on the street? No, I don't doubt that at all. You don't get a Benjamin Netanyahu with his popularity without that element being in the country. So it's just possibly I found the lefty, Israeli. So who knows? Who knows? Also, you were not asking them how they felt about Palestinians, Jamal. And you say, that's true. That's also true, Anna. That is absolutely true. Jamal, have you tried to get Abby Martin on the show? The Juice! I love that name, The Juice. Yes, I have, actually. I sent Abby Martin an email. I'm going to send her another email. She said she was going to be out of the country. But potentially, I guess. I hit her up on Twitter. She told me to hit her back through her email. So I'm hitting her. I'm going to keep contacting her. So yeah. Jews still lived in Palestine with the Arab neighbors for thousands of years without trouble. Zionism is, yes, John B., I agree. This idea that this is our land and we can just steal it. And we can use military force to do so. Yeah. All right, this has gone 24 minutes. I don't want to go too long. I'm going to have a few that I'm going to do today. Like I said, Cynthia McKinney is going to be here. McKinney is going to be here this evening at 9:30. That should be an amazing interview. Very interesting interview. Let me say it that way. A very interesting interview. She has been extremely bombastic for somebody who's been in the United States Congress. So I'm fascinated by her. But she's going to be on tonight, and Elizabeth Voss is going to be on Wednesday. So I will end it here. Joel Haas, I don't see Israel being forgiven by its neighbors without violence as a result. Israel has nuclear weapons. Part of the reason that Israel does not want Iran to have nuclear weapons is because they don't want any balance in the region. The goal in all of this is not to have balance. The goal of this is not fairness. The goal of this is military domination of the neighbors. That's what it is. That's all it is. Any talking about fairness or everything else goes over their head. Any talking about, it's like, well, this is nonsense. This is majorly hypocritical. They don't care. Military force, military domination of that region. We have nuclear weapons. We can dominate the other countries. We can strike you whenever we want to strike you. You can't do shit about it. And we have our big brother, the United States, backing us if anything gets hairy. I mean, the reason, let's be honest. Do you honestly believe that Israel was able to win that war by themselves? The catastrophe? No, they had help winning that war. The United States assisted in maintaining the Israeli state with resources. So let's be honest. Yeah, let's be honest. But whatever. This was a tragic day. They're murdering a lot of Palestinians and injuring a lot of others. And the 52 is not going to be the end result. This number could have been updated over and over, hour by hour by hour. I'll leave it at that. I just wanted to give context. I just wanted to give somebody historical context to what's taking place now and why these people are so pissed off and why people are so obtuse and annoyed by what's taking place today. So, all right, guys. If you and Rabbi Shapiro, that's funny, guard. Yeah. All right, guys. If you enjoyed the content, please feel free to share, like, subscribe, and of course, you can always support the Patreon. Thanks, guys.